Pavlich welcome you very warmly, all participants to today's event. This is the part of the Green International Lecture Series, which is organized by our GEM project team. And this is the Green Education in Media project. And today's topic is the growth and sustainability in the audiovisual field. And during the meeting, we will try to explore how visual media can address and problematize sustainability issues in film production. Our goal is not only to share the knowledge, but also to inspire and lead us to very many reflections about sustainability. And first of all, I would like to introduce our presenters. With us is Anna Wróblewska from Poland. She will present a lecture titled Green Film and Institutions, discussing the role of the institution in promoting sustainability practices in filmmaking. I think that we will see lots of examples of such usage. Anya is a holder of a doctoral degree in humanities, an academic teacher, a writer, culture manager, and spokesperson. She works as an assistant professor in Łódź Film School in Poland. And what is important, her academic interests include first and foremost, as she underlined, cultural project management strategies, creative industry, the Polish film industry, animated film, and children films. She was a spokesperson for Polish Film Institute, Association of Polish Filmmakers, Munk Studio, and Gdynia Polish Film Festival. She is an author and also co-author of a number of books and articles. She is a two-time laureate of Polish Film Institute Prize, honored by Polish Minister of Culture and National Heritage in 2005, and awarded the Bronze Gloria Artis Medal for her service to culture in 2015. And our second presenter is Dr. Mladen Domazet. He's a researcher at the Institute of Philosophy and the Institute for Political Ecology in Zagreb in Croatia. He was a member of the organizing teams on the 6th and 9th International Degrowth conferences, and currently works on a social science paradigm shifts, degrowth compatible exploratory framework of the social transformation and social attitudes relevant to sustainability. The Degrowth Doughnut is a visualization and strategizing tool which is developed by a transdisciplinary research team he chaired, and a transformation compass piloted with diverse stakeholders in European semi-ferry. So we are very welcome that you are today with us, and I would ask before we start maybe if Bjorn is with us. Would you like to welcome our guest, Bjorn? Hello. Maybe it's not possible to connect right now.
Sorry, he can't at the moment.
Okay, so because Bjorn is our leader of the project. So special thanks also for him to inspire us to collaborate together among this sustainability issue. So at first we start with Anna Wróblewska, Green Film and Institutions. Anya, the floor is yours.
Okay. Can you see everybody? Mr. Arnold Schwarzenegger? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I would like to talk about the origins and genesis of green film production in Poland, about models, about the problems and ideas we have here in Poland, about legal solutions which we have not yet in Poland. But if you know, I think inspiration came from United States and the United Kingdom, and I don't know if you have heard about the connection the connection between Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor of California, and green film production. Have you heard about it? Because I like this plot very well. Nobody. Okay. So as you know, I think the first initiative in green film production are in 2014, 2015. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, film star, of course, and the governor of California decided to commission the first study on the carbon footprint and pollution generated by the film industry in Los Angeles. Plus, of course, proposed solution. I have this study. This is prepared by UCLA. I can share if you want. You can email me, and I can send you if you want. And I like this. I like this history because, as you know, Ernest's film weren't environmentally friendly, weren't green. All this explosion, the visual effects on set. So for me, it's very interesting. The story is very interesting. I like it. And in Poland, of course, the producers and institution mainly use the experience of the British Film Institute and the Albert Guide, the Albert report. I think everybody knows Albert Guide. I like this. This report. I very often read this book, and for me it's very useful. I mostly like the examples of green solution in British American films. Then I said I would like to underline two of them: Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, and of course, and Yesterday. And this is examples. These two film productions are the examples of very, very developed sustainability in green cinema. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. This is my first time here in this project. So I would like to present to you some solutions, some green solution with Mamma Mia. Mamma Mia, the second part, of course, it was produced 6 or 5 years ago. Production partnered with a local company to educate crew and implement a waste diversion program. For example, recycling, composting, waste to energy. It's one. The second, heaters were powered with biodiesel made from used cooking oil. I don't know the solution in Poland like this. A crew had, of course, water bottles. It's standard now, I think. Office paper came from recycling, and majority of the set lights were LEDs. Production I like this. I like the story because production donated clothing, shoes, and catering to the organization, non-profit organization. I checked it, but we in Poland we don't have such legal solutions, and for me it is a big problem. The similar solution were in yesterday, and they often choose the public transport for the crew. They limited flights, limited trains. They had more transport solution, and it was one of their how to say way of how to say
reducing. Yeah, reducing.
I'm a little bit nervous. I'm sorry.
Yes, it's okay. It's
yes,
fine.
because it is my first time here, and so I'm a little bit stressed. So in Poland, the first initiatives came in 2020 during the pandemic, which of course complicated the process. Importantly, it is what I would like to underline. Most green initiatives depend on young, independent producers, not in institutions. Małgosia, do you agree with me?
Totally agree. And I think that they are the leaders, and we follow the young filmmakers because it's the trend which should be among the others.
Yes, the exceptions are, of course, the Łódź Film Commission, which you know, I think, or our National Chamber of Audiovisual Producers. The National Chamber of Audiovisual Producers, called KIPA, this is our current center of competence for green filming, I think. Do you agree? Once again, I think these two institutions are the most important, yes?
Yes, we have our president Monika Głowacka, so
yes.
I think that she shaped very well it.
Yes, of course. And Polish green film production concerns areas such as office savings, paper reduction, catering, cleaning waste, washing up, transport solution, searching for alternatives to power generators. And it is the most difficult thing, I think. Energy savings, the same, and limitation on electronic data transmissions. It is our ecological areas, yes? And the main recommendations in green production prepared by the Łódź Film Commission and the National Chamber of Audiovisual Producers are as follows. I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but it is use of recycled paper, yes, respect and limit paper, respect for the environment during location shooting, employing local crew, ban plastic water bottles, providing grid power to the backlot, changing to LED lighting, and recycling, dedicated to recycling facilities as a part of management plan. I think this the last idea isn't very popular now in this moment, but I think it could be possible in the future. I can't find it in our sets. Maybe Małgosia, you have the another impression, but I think we are still waiting for the ecological solution, ecological ideas in management plan. I think it is only idea of determined persons, of determined assistants, and young people who are interested in this area. What do you think?
I think that maybe after the presentation we will have a
Okay.
little time to discuss. Maybe
Okay.
there will be the questions, but I think that of course we have lots of directions, but it's very hard when we think that we might decide as a plan without approving by the crew and approving by the values or importance of for the members of the crew. Yes, when
Yes.
we all decide that okay, we will use it, we will change the way of film making. Is the first step, but the second step is how to implement to the members of the group.
But I think it is always our dream, but it's not reality. Yes, this point, and of course, public transport options in planning. I think it's more possible. And we have informal ambassadors of green production in Poland. Bartosz Bielenia, maybe you remember him from Corpus Christi film, and the director is Jagoda Szelc. And it helps. I think it helps. And and I would like to say you some. Would like to say about tell you about some problems. And the problem is the points for green film production are mainly aided by one or two regional film funds, Krakow and Łódź. And we are still waiting for a change in the perspective of the Polish Film Institute. I know the project of new program of Polish Film Institute. I can't find it. I can't find any green solutions in this document. Maybe it will change, but this is a problem because this is the most important film institution in Poland. Yes, so I'm afraid a little about it. And what else? We have a big problem with recycled set decorations. Most of decoration go into the mixed waste. This for me, I can't tolerate it, but it is true. And what else? In Poland, the team has to wait for permission from the power plant to connect to the grid even 2 weeks. So we don't have we don't have that much time because time is money. So the practices from the part of the power plants should be changed. Yes, but if we have to wait 2 weeks for permission, this is a problem for manager, for producer. What else? Yes. A problem with clearing of clearing a Polish Film Institute grant. If you are clearing an application to the Film Institute, the Polish Film Institute, you cannot show that you have to use recycled materials. And now there is no solution for this. I have no idea. Maybe you can help us. And of course, I think you know it very well. It is hard to change habits regarding transport, campers, and logistic, film stars, private cars, private transport. It's probably because we talk about 70 years of old practices. So I don't know how much time we need. Yes, what would you like to add? I would like to, my last slide is about the Polish Green festivals, because it is more optimistic because we definitely see an evaluation of film festival in Poland. The biggest film festivals have already changed their practices. And of course, due to young people in the festival teams, managers, young managers, press spokesmen, and the new practices in Poland, the biggest Polish film festivals are as I see, this is reducing prints and gadgets, more sensible marketing, more digital marketing than paper, for example. Some industry meetings are organized online, and I see more restriction of domestic flights, yes. But of course, the festivals in Poland are very they never, the film festival are never very green, because the festival is always place of meetings. Yes, we have to meet, and we have to be in real place, real time. So I think we can limit some materials, paper, but we cannot limit our meetings. And this is and of course, because maybe this is true, then cinema, film production never is how to say, we can, of course, we can dream about sustainability, but cinema will never be green. Yes. And we always generate carbon footprint. Yes, Małgosia, thank you for the invitation. Sorry for my English. I'm very nervous because it is my first time online about the subject. I'm very sorry because it is a new experience for me. So thank you for the invitation.
It was great. Thank you very much. Sometimes the first time is, as a first time, we are nervous, but the second one will be better. So welcome in our team, in our group. So it was very interesting because you summarize all of the topics that we are very focused on the film set, but also how the institutions might support this process. And Anya, don't stop believing that the filmmaking might be greener. Maybe we will not be so fully green.
But we can limit, but we.
but it's
discussion green.
Yes, but it's also the discussion about the technology. Yes, because if the technology on the post-production and on the film set will change, will be innovative, so maybe it might be more sustainable. Yes.
Yes, of course. In animated film, we choose now LED lighting, and the LED lightings, and I can see the difference because I work in animated film, so I can see this choice. Yes, for example, LED lighting. Mm-hmm. We spent in animated films. We spent on the set even 1 year. So we can calculate, yes, the carbon footprint if we use the LED lighting.
Okay. Thank you, Anya. Goran, are we start the discussion or?
Yeah, I think we can open the floor for questions or comments of the participants. There are many issues which resonate, I guess, and I believe with the different environments in different, of course, conditions, but some of the problems are general. So I guess our colleagues can share or comment and mention better practices maybe or worse practices, as it were.
Yes, but there is the great discussion among such these institutions, and you are very well pointed that there is the need to support those initiatives, especially when we have the first movie for the young filmmakers when the budget is lower. But it's not only the discussion about the first movie, but generally this is the discussion among all of the institutions in Europe, what we are focused on it, how to support, how to gain some extra points to support such an initiative. Also, the second one is also the discussion among the certification. Yes, because this might be a huge support when we will gain this certificate, and this certificate will give us something, and this is the discussion among how it might influence on the film distribution or for film promotion. Yes, and what else we might add, Anya, if you want, because you are.
I don't know.
Okay, because you were unmuted.
I'm looking for this international agreement.
It's okay. It's okay. Let's give.
But I don't know any other international initiative. Only this one. Yes, because.
Okay. So maybe it's the time to go to the second presentation to Mladen Domazet. We are very welcome that you are with us, but everyone, if wants to ask some other question, maybe we will have some time at the end. But right now, let's give the floor to Mladen Degrowth Doughnut. Very interesting initiative. So, Mladen, the floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to have an opportunity today to show you some of the work we're doing with Degrowth Doughnut. My work is not in film production, as you can guess, so I won't be speaking on the actual footprint or impacts of production materially. I'm more interested in talking to you about ideas and this sort of immaterial cultural thing that comes from production. That's why visualizing and communicating just sustainability is the topic of what I want to show you today. A little bit about me. I wasn't aware, I'd forgotten how academic these Erasmus settings are, so my biography that I sent to Goran wasn't full of my education. I've completed physics and philosophy education in University of Oxford and continued into a doctorate in the same thing at the University of Zagreb. Why this is relevant is that it looks like I'm very, very far away from the things both that you're doing and that I'm going to be talking to you about today. But I hope that towards the end you will realize how it rests in this understanding and research I've done in explanation, especially in the discourses we use for explanation. I've gone on to work at various research fellowships, increasingly in the fields of sustainability and social justice in institutions in Europe. And in 2015, I co-founded the Institute for Political Ecology in Zagreb because current academic institutions do not provide a space to work on the topics that we work on at the Institute and that we wanted to work on already 10 years ago, degrowth being one of those important topics. In the meantime, I've contributed to the IPCC's reports on climate, and I've also sat in and even contributed to UNFCCC climate negotiations because at the time there was an opportunity to be a part of the EU delegation, etc. And then I've gained some of these academic titles since, and have worked on organizing two degrowth conferences, which is unique in at least the European setting. Most of the degrowth conferences tended to take place in Europe, although not exclusively all. But the first one after the big stop of physical meetings that the pandemic introduced was then done in Zagreb again. What I work on today is illustrated by these two things. One is a big collaborative project towards an economy for sustainable well-being. It is a big Horizon project funded by the EU with many universities from around Europe participating, where we are looking for this narrative of how to speak up a necessary radical transformation that we need to truly stay sustainable and not just reduce a few water bottles. And then I teach when I get a chance at institutions around the region here. And I have to say I'm very proud of the master thesis of Clara Salaveria Embid from the program in Sarajevo and Bologna, that won I was her supervisor, and she won the Summa Cum Laude award of the program, and these UN Global Campus programs on exploring a topic that's not even in the news yet, and that's the lithium mining that's coming up in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You've all probably heard about the lithium mining in Serbia. I'll try and do a brief introduction on shifting perspective a little bit. I'm aware that we don't have much time and I want to move on to the solutions for communication, but let's set the scene a little bit, at least from the work I do, of how the world looks, or what the problem that we're talking about today looks like from perhaps a transdisciplinary, more holistic perspective. If you want, it's the little bit of philosophy with pictures budding into the stuff that I'm going to show you today. One of the things is this projection from The Economist, not a very radically left publication that relies on the research paper to do this visualization of the projected change in suitability for human habitation in 2070. So just within our lifetime, certainly yours, perhaps less so mine, in this century, where we're expecting a warming, general global warming between 2 and 2.5 degrees, which is guaranteed to hit by now, and we're probably hitting more towards 3 degrees and more, where these deep red zones are not only less suitable to human habitations than they have ever been in human history. And remember, human history goes at least 200,000 years back. The fact that we've been living and making houses and warming ourselves up and finding food and then growing food, etc. But in the deep red zones, this is totally outside the historical human niche. Now, that means that humans have never lived in such conditions as a species. Now, that is a pretty horrible picture, because that happens to hit the zones where about 5 times the population of Europe, even up to half of the global population today, is living. So these people are going to have to go somewhere. And this is going to be an issue that we're going to talk about. But more interestingly, there are those zones at the edge of Europe as well. So when we often sit in Europe and say, oh, but this doesn't concern me, and it's somewhere across the Mediterranean and deep south, etc., there are zones in Europe that will themselves be affected by such climate change. We're also living in a world of great inequalities. You can probably cite various statistics about it. I am often most inspired to illustrate that by this work of Mladen Stilinovic, who's a late Croatian artist. It was called Nobody Wants to See. That the 3 richest men in the world own as much as 600 million of the poorest people. And now we can cite such a statistic, we can show a graph, but what Mladen shows with this piece of artwork is one tiny number 3 printed at the center of one of these large sheets, and then 200 million number 3s representing 3 times 200 million, 600 million people, printed back to back on the remaining papers, not only on the wall, but all these papers on the palettes in the gallery space. This is the size of the inequality. This is how much the 3 richest are supposed to be more worth, more valuable to the planet, more valuable to humanity than everyone else here. And that is something unusual, and that is something that should at least make you wonder, if not be absolutely opposed to it. Now, we've known that focusing on economic growth has, alongside the benefits that especially in Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe we like to attribute to it and be happy with our increased size and number of cars, has done to us. But it's also, at least here's a graph since the 90s. I can show you many graphs. I promise this is the only graph as such that I'll be showing in today's presentation. But since the 90s, the rise of GDP has also been followed by the rise of material footprint. So we don't produce economic activity without stamping a footprint, without leaving an impact on the planet. And now we're possibly hitting the total planetary boundary, the total planetary limit of leaving those impacts. Now, how did we get to this GDP as a measure? And I usually can, in a longer introduction of degrowth and various measures we could use to assess well-being, something that we're working on that project as well, would then do a longer introduction on what GDP is. Here's a brief one. GDP is an index, it's a measure. If you've chosen to do film school, you maybe hate economics and mathematics, so just think of it as a number that the economists calculate and like to track. And you will also know that all your politicians like to talk about it. In fact, they will probably condition any funding that you can get from public funds on the trend of movement or the size of this GDP. Well, it was originally introduced by Kuznets to reconcile demands of war and private consumption, so to sort of see how a state could shift its resources into fighting a war, a Second World War, and still maintain the bare necessities or the well-being necessities of private consumption. As I said, Simon Kuznets, a name to remember, was the one who devised it. But even he was already aware that such a measure, such single number, this reduction of complex activity as society and economy are to a single number, measures both goods and also ills or bads together, ills coming as an opposite from wealth. So it also doesn't include the necessary informal economy. So for an economy to run, somebody has to clean the houses, you have to stay healthy, you have to eat well, you have to share both information and materials through social networks, but that's not something that will be measured by GDP unless you're paying through public accounting, through issuing invoices for each of those activities. And if you remember, primarily it's the women in your lives. If you remember your mothers in your households, they certainly weren't issuing you invoices for all the cleaning they've done after you. Now, after Second World War, OECD focused on making the economic growth paradigm in order to replace the hollow idea of progress, especially as it rang hollow after Second World War, because there was a lot of progress invoked in a lot of destruction that was preceding the war. But also it needed a technocratic idea of growth to compete with the Soviets' intense public infrastructure expansion. So something the West needed its own measure of how well it's doing. Finally, as long as there was always more growth, the fortunes of both workers and owners could improve forever. So you didn't have to have this social discussion of how we are sharing the social product. When we make something together, when we make something as a larger group, how much of the benefits of what we made goes to each one of us. And I'm pretty sure that you know these debates even on cultural production settings that are not so material. So what happened? Well, at least in the last 50 years, we've had this drive for the economic growth. We've been pushing it, especially with the fall of the Soviet bloc. It's kind of spread around the world as a single global ideology of how we can all live better, how we can all be better off. But what's primarily happened is that we've been siphoning more of the benefits produced from that to the richest 10% or 1%, and it's been accumulating at the top, and this is the difference as to how much it's been rising across European countries. So today, we need to really find a way to navigate through the eye of the needle between the planetary limits on one side, which are saying, stop now, you can't go on, all of you, as you have so far, and this need for improved life, for emancipation, for at least justice for everyone on the planet today. So here's a quote from Kohei Saito from his popular book on degrowth called Slow Down. that as capitalism's antithesis, degrowth emphasizes forms of prosperity and quality of life that aren't necessarily reflected in this index of GDP. That it's a transition from quantity, which is measured by growth, into quality, etc. Anyway, worth a read if you're interested in more. Now, just to say, this isn't a new idea. Don't be so shocked by it. This has been all put into words, in fact, in political policy words, already in 1974. So exactly 50 years ago, there was a Kokoyok declaration by the United Nations Environment Programme, which outlined both the science, the conceptual framework, how we should think about our relationship to each other and to nature, and the planning steps into how to achieve well-being for all. It is only about 10 pages long. It uses very direct, very simple language. It was never adopted by the UN General Assembly. It was rejected as such. And we've been riding this roller coaster ever since, to today's situation where, if you want, you can read Andreas Mounds and Will Carton's book on overshoot, which is now this new popular dominant idea where we say, okay, we're going to just accept that we're going across the scientifically set limits, hoping that in this future, as we're we're going across the cliff, but whilst we're just flying across the cliff, somebody might think of something that will pull us back and bring us back into the normal, because we're not willing to stop ourselves before reaching the cliff. It's a good book to pick up on. And the reason they find that we're doing this is that investments that are poured into fossil fuels, which are larger today than any investments we put into renewables, are basically such because they bring larger profits than renewables. Our culture is focused on producing profits, and as a culture, by our leaders and by our support for the leaders, we do things which will generate higher profits, even if we know scientifically that it leads to the detriment of us. We've organized a big conference in Zagreb on these issues. The conference on degrowth was opened by a speech by the vice chair of the IPCC. I hope you know IPCC is the International Organization of Scientists that tends to collate, to summarize various reports on the progression of climate change, but also its social impacts, the vulnerabilities of different people, everything we research in this sphere, and puts them in these combined reports that then also have summaries in order to have this kind of one voice speaking to the politicians. But what we got from the media from such an event, even though there was an interview with the keynote speaker, with the vice chair of IPCC, that was never publicized. The TV censored it. And what we got as media response instead kind of divides into these themes of, there was a conference in Zagreb that deals with barbarism, a non-civilized, non-European world. And you will now see a lot of these tropes, which in decent academic parlance we don't use. So funny things like those who intend to implement deliberate degrowth don't stand the chance to be a part of the European milieu, whatever European milieu should be. Then there was these fears of depopulation and savage nature, a sort of Hobbesian state of nature, as if we'd only just yesterday escaped from eating raw meat and clawing at each other around caves. And then there's this shaming of European periphery and stagnation as if it's solely the choice and not of the people living there, and not a consequence of wider global structures and various material extractivist practices that flow between cores and peripheries. Then more tropes, more popular themes were that it's a gathering of the radical liberal left. Now that's a new concept coming from the US, so that you're radically left but radically liberal. Then, of course, there was a danger of foreign conspiracy. This is all cooked up by evil foreigners who want to harm us. And then, of course, the usual scare in Eastern Europe of communism rising. When it's not at these levels of alarmist populist, the pushback from the media dealt with paternalist, denialist themes. So usually it would be male scientists, senior white male scientists, calmly explaining that there is no reason for concern either by saying that capitalism is the historically normal pinnacle of development and civilization, so there's just no other way, we can't think of another way to do things, or that precautionary principles have historically been disproven, that in fact we have been speaking about hitting limits for 50 years, but they say, oh, but we've never actually run out of one single thing, which was never really the story that limits was talking about. As you know, limits work in curves, so you hit a peak and then you start going down, and going down doesn't happen instantaneously, but things become more and more expensive and harder to reach, which is why we're now willing to dig the tar sands of Alberta for oil, which we were certainly not willing to do in the 70s because it was stupidly too expensive and too polluting. But now the price of oil has allowed us to find that to be economically viable. And then perhaps the softest approach is this polemic approach that wants to talk about these things, similar to what's given in this book by Daniel Susskind, which also you can read as a criticism of degrowth, that says, sure, many things that come out of a drive, a run after growth are bad, but we can work on making this growth greener and better. What it turns out, as attested by many reviewers and in the book itself, is that they then end up advocating for growth agnosticism, something that's popularly called A-growth by only one scientist who wants to push it. So it's got this different name, but it's basically degrowth by nature because it focuses on, okay, let's make plans on what we can do with the surplus we made rather than simply, as it were, leave it to the market. So leave it to the strongest ones to obtain it for themselves. Situation today, I don't have more time to spend on this. So simply reporting on, again, another summary piece by well, it's a signatory of 15,000 scientists, but the paper is authored by much less. The writers of the paper are a few dozen. And this is the Guardian's reporting on it, that basically currently Earth's vital signs show that all of humanity's future is in the balance, that we're hitting this cliff that I was mentioning to you at the start. What can arts do? You know, this may not be any of your business. Well, here's a bit of artwork from the Zagreb Degrowth Conference that we were trying to sort of position all over the conference space to integrate rather than just hang on the side of an event, an intellectual event discussing these matters. But here's a lesson also from Ursula Le Guin, late Ursula Le Guin, as she was receiving her National Book Foundation Awards, where she said that hard times are coming, when we'll be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now, can see through our fear-stricken society and its obsessive technologies to other ways of being, and even imagine real grounds for hope. We'll need writers who can remember freedom, poets and visionaries, and realists of a larger reality. More importantly, what we always know from Ursula is this important quote that we live in capitalism and its power seems inescapable, but then so did the divine right of kings once upon a time, not only in Europe, but certainly in much of Eurasia as well. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings, and resistance and change often begin in art. That's my invitation to you to be willing to even consider these topics. Now, on to communication. You want to break free out of this paralysis. Can you imagine a way out? What could we do, at least in terms of visual communication? This is static visual because I'm not clever enough to do a moving visual. That is really your domain, guys, but at least maybe this bit of static visuals can inspire you. What we need is a different mental model, a mental model that would allow us to see how we could be within natural boundaries, but also satisfying our aspirations, aiming for our emancipations. And that is a mental, at the moment, we're stuck between a zero-sum game that's not possible. If I want to have a good life, I must destroy. I think perhaps you've been illustrating some of that in examples you were giving from the type of productions you see you have to work on. Now, could we at least imagine things differently so that we could start building things differently? I'm here today to propose a mental model like that, a bit more scientific-y, but I'll show you also how we use it even in institutions like the theater, so performing arts, live performing arts institutions. certainly we have to start thinking in the difference between linear and circular. And there's a difference between linear and circular economy. Again, this is a drawing, not a graph, but a linear economy takes something, transforms it, makes it, uses, and it basically keeps linearly decreasing its value until it becomes a waste that cannot be used anymore and must be put aside, or in the latest fashion of various Europeans, be burnt and put into the air. Now, a circular economy would envision this process in a way that goes through some of the steps where we're getting some good of it, we're getting consumption, but we can repair what we've used through consumption and find a way to return it back into the process rather than dump it as waste or burn it. So we need to start thinking in circles. At the moment, the world economy is certainly not circular. Its only circular element would be this. About 6% of everything that we put materially into the world economy can be considered as processed and returned into it. You might say that this stuff that stays in stocks, a stock is a building or a road, something you built and then can be used over and over, isn't an immediately consumable thing. You might say that's a bit durable, although start thinking about the insulation you have in many of the buildings we're using today. And you might start wondering about their durability under climate change, but most of it goes into domestic processed output and gets thrown away as waste. So it is a very large linear machine around the world. Now, to start thinking in circles, we can start with creating images of either these concentric circles or spirals. So there's a lot of like long timelines, for instance, here that we can depict on a spiral. They allow us to see something that is very, very long in one eye blink to show comparisons. This is exactly, I think, the evolutionary tree of moving animals. So simpler to more complex, but as you can see, there's a lot of time passing and there's a lot of rise and fall of various species, but it gets wrapped up into a circular image. We can do these radial circular images comparing, for instance, how much impact certain things have. There's a few things listed here. But again, allowing us to see all of them in one go. So rather than having a linear graph listing these side by side, you can start listing them in a circle so that you can see that the size of this compares to the size of this, but also the size of this. And this will be important for the images I'm showing you with the donuts. And then also circles allow us to present networking graphs, which kind of allow us to show a connection of multitude of things that we put on the circle's rim, through the center and these intermediary stages in between. So that does lead us to, okay, I promised one graph, I've forgotten I had another one. Here's what we need to do, again, from Kohei Saito's book. This is the trend of rising GDP. This is what we would get by relative decoupling, and some of the energy and other material efficiencies that you've been talking about in this lecture and in this course before would be going towards relative decoupling, so that you get more with a lower footprint. And absolute decoupling would be that you're literally reducing your footprints while still raising the benefit. If you want, here it's listed as GDP, you can list it as a profit of what you're doing or the amount of claps you're getting. But what we really need is a very strong, sufficient absolute decoupling, which we're nowhere near as hitting. This is why we propose the degrowth donut, a circular image like this, which I will go through the details of explaining its structure to you, which would allow us to see where we're overstepping and where we're doing well, both in attaining the inner rims and in not crossing the outer rims. I was going to put in a little bit of sciencey theory, but I think for the end of today, you may be a bit tired of that. But if it was a science, we would be talking about the science of social metabolism, and these graphs would be trying to help us to visualize it. It would be a different type of science, not the one like statistical mechanics. Don't worry, statistical mechanics is just a mechanical science of bumps, a bit like clockworks. It would be more like a science of thermodynamics, which covers the same field, but doesn't talk about the elements of what it's composed of, but talks about the general laws under which we have to combine. Trust me, I've written a doctorate on it. It's a whole bunch of stuff that can be drawn upon. And then we could start with these planetary boundary graphs, which are showing us how much only in the physical side we've already crossed. Now, these kind of principal sciences like thermodynamics can be a bridge towards a better theory, so towards a better understanding, to escape the zero-sum game of how we could have well-being within planetary boundaries. So remember, we get this from Einstein's principal theory of special relativity from 1905, where ether gets entirely cancelled. So there was something we believed exists out there. It was called ether. We were all supposed to be moving through it. It was supposed to be carrying all our signals, even the electromagnetic waves, which allow me to transfer this from my room to each of your individual rooms. But we had to cancel the ether because we couldn't find evidence of it existing, and we had to make a different theory, which allowed us to talk about, to verify the fact that you are seeing me, and not only through wires, but also through antenna and the air, but without the ether carrying it. Now, the visualizations, this is the process of building the donuts that started with planetary boundaries graphs, which was this radar graph, which tried to show several of these indicators and how much we've crossed the safe zone and gone into the red. Kate Rayworth then devised a donut economics graph, which tried to put these natural limits on the outer rim and social aspirations on the inner rim, saying, okay, we are crossing natural boundaries, but we're not doing it simply out of hubris. We're doing this to try and achieve certain goals, and how well are we doing on achieving those goals? And then at the team at the Institute for Political Ecology, it was an international and interdisciplinary team just before COVID. We worked on modifying this to allow to consider boundaries both in cultural and social spheres, as well as the aspirations in nature restoration spheres, because we are in the 21st century reaching a stage where we have to start actively working on fixing nature rather than just leaving it be or protecting it, because we are so much of an influence on the planet. So a degrowth donut would be this visual measure, and which concepts would it include? Well, it would certainly talk about boundaries, so boundaries in climate change, boundaries in geochemical processes, but also boundaries in democratic ignorance and environmental concerns. We do have a boundary in societies that refuse to accept both the danger of climate change or collective action on it, in that if we want democratically to move towards taking steps on it, then we need to have a democratic majority supporting it. And that's considered a boundary, something we need to work on if a majority of our population sees climate change as not happening, despite rivers taking away their towns and fires burning their fields and villages. But likewise, a degrowth donut would have inner thresholds as well. So it would have aspirations both to thriving communities, something that donut economics already promises in its visualization, but also seeking a dynamic balance with nature between humans. So you would want threshold in climate awareness, but also in the ability to shift transport modes, to change to different modes of transport, to move to these festivals that Anya was mentioning in a way that is much less polluting than we're moving now by cheap flights, energy transition for the entire system, continued education for change, etc. So there are aspirations that as a society we want to achieve. So a degrowth donut provides a mental model or a conceptual tool, a way to start thinking about more than one dimension. GDP was forcing us to think in one dimension. We will distill all our activity to this one number, and then by tracking this one number, we'll know whether we are doing well or badly. A degrowth donut would have a structure that is recognizable to people by 3 segments. So a cultural segment where we're talking about popular attitudes, but also popular states. So for instance, average well-being, the reported state of health in society, etc. Socioeconomic segment where we would be talking about elements of economy and material throughput in societies. And then this biophysical segment where we would be talking about the imprint on the world that we are leaving by our tiny little activities, all our individual activities adding up, and also on the goals we want to set for nature restoration so that the entire planetary biosphere would not hit that cliff we were talking about earlier. It would help us to visualize sustainability by saying, okay, on this number of different concepts and indicators, we need to start measuring things so that their values do not go into these red wedges, either outside or inside, but that we can pull them all, like some of these values that we already have, we can pull them within the green inner ring. And that way we can talk about some things where we are doing well already. So for instance, on this visualization, you can say energy per capita, energy use per capita in this, I think it's a country, I think this was an example of Croatia, is good. So there's no need to reduce it. And degrowth isn't only about reductions. But for instance, corruption perception in the country is very bad, and we need to start working on the idea that people need to find a way to trust the society more, because with this level of corruption perception, we're not going to get a community to work together because they're not going to trust that if I do my bit, you're going to do your bit. Okay, so one of the ways is to create these donuts for nations. That's the easiest. There's a lot of statistics collected for nations. We use them, for instance, to make resilience assessment of different countries in the resilience to the pandemic, but also to consider the roots of that resilience. So the point being that you can compare countries and see where they are doing well or badly. And generally, what you get here is that this is the country with the good COVID response, so you would focus on whether perhaps it's paying for that with these very bad overshooting indicators. This is the country with the worst COVID response in the sample, and it differs in having this segment, this cultural segment, very strongly accentuated. You can also make assessments of performances of single countries. Here's an example of Hungary, another paper we've done comparing this donut assessment of Hungary with Hungary's national low carbon strategy, where we tried to point out that the strategy is basically hiding many of the problems and focusing on too narrow a band. So this is a country with serious climate change and biodiversity loss drivers. So there's all these problems with intensive agriculture, a lot of carbon emissions, etc. But its own energy and material throughput are not so bad. In fact, they per capita fall in the sustainable range, and its popular environmentalism is not so bad. So it doesn't have a population that, according to international surveys that we follow, is largely opposed to believing and acting on climate change. However, it does have a population that has a low social trust. It has a big distrust of its democratic institutions and huge corruption perceptions, also low life satisfaction. So there's a question of how could this population gather strength to go and act on these matters. And this is precisely what the strategy that was put forth doesn't address, but tries to kind of ignore these and put a few easy measures that don't have to deal with this collective trust action. You can focus on cities. We've done analysis for the city of Pula, for example, where again, you can see that in the cultural segment, there's no problems, and we can't have this constant claim, our people will not do this. Our people are concerned about the matters. They're seeing problems on TV. It's more a matter of whether they can find agents to lead them through the transformation that they can trust. But certainly as a tourist city, it does have all these other large footprints which are attributed to its economy, even if not necessarily made by its very residents. Most interestingly, we've applied this to the Croatian National Theatre in Zagreb through a project Stages, where there was this whole issue of trying to measure impacts of visual arts, performing arts productions and performing arts institutions, especially old Austro-Hungarian institutions with terrible insulation, such as this typical building of late 19th century theater in Zagreb is. You might want to measure things if you're considering a theater. You obviously are not going to measure climate emissions directly because you don't know what carbon emissions exactly of a theater are, but you can make proxy measurements. But you also want to measure things like climate change nonchalance or lack of care about climate change among its employees. So whether this workers' collective is actually disinterested and doesn't care about its impact. Anthropogenic climate change awareness, so whether people are aware that climate change is happening globally, whether they are dismissive of renewable energies, so therefore not willing to introduce it, etc. But then there are social measures like gender equality. Is this a collective where you can actually have an equal voice based on gender? Does that then contribute to different practices? Also education for workplace sustainability, but also the state of precarious work. If I'm employed here only very briefly, I don't really much care about what happens to the institution in 50 years' time, and it's not really my concern to lead on its environmental impact. What we get then is this kind of profile for the National Theatre in Zagreb. I want to show you, so this is the profile for the National Theatre in Zagreb. Generally similar zones, culture, nature, and society at the bottom. Nature, big problem in Zagreb, much bigger than state of Croatia or even bigger than the city of Zagreb on average. Of course, not identical measures, but in these spheres. But again, both in the city of Zagreb and among the employees of Zagreb National Theatre, it's not the opposition to action on climate change. It's not the opposition to even believing in climate change that is the problem. On national level in Croatia, it might be more so, but certainly the theatre in Zagreb is similar to the general average population of the city of Zagreb, where concern and awareness exist. So therefore, we're looking for instruments next on how to act on it. That would be the example of how you do it. I'm not going to go into much more detail, but this is a presentation of what you want to do with a visualizing tool like that. If you wanted to know more about all of these topics, I can suggest various formats. One is obviously in books. I like books. This is all by Kim Stanley Robinson, a rather famous science fiction author, but don't worry, it's not a science fiction saga of space sagas like the Dune. There's no empires, there's no spaceships. In this brief selection of 4 books, I think Kim touches upon many of the issues that we touched upon today, most notably on degrowth in the Ministry for the Future, his latest book, but also on sort of techno-optimism and the ideas of tech bros on replacing various nature services by technology in Aurora, or perhaps on the very origins of our cultural traits, and also imagining our existence prior, the human existence prior to the last several hundred years, where we see them all as red in tooth and claw, even though all our anthropological evidence points to the fact that they loved and created and debated and had to deal with many social issues as well. This is a sort of a science fiction projection into the past in the Shaman book. Online, you can find podcasts, say, on the BBC, 7 Deadly Psychologies and Fire Weather. We'll talk about both psychological basis for some of our current ideological trends, and also on the development of climate change knowledge, and then most notably in Fire Weather on the active obstruction performed by some of those in power to act on climate change for more than my lifetime, and I'm not such a spring chicken. I advise also seeing Greta Thunberg's 7-minute speech, but not on the right-wing media where it's cut down to 1 minute, where she, I think, explains or explained very, very well what the problem was at that UN assembly. She put a lot of the simple good facts in this one simple speech, or you can find things like Degrowth Explained, custom-made videos on explaining these topics. For a longer thing in your field of work, I can recommend a documentary film on degrowth and climate crisis called Fairy Tales of Growth. It's freely available on YouTube, and it's made by the Institute's junior research fellow, Pierre Smith-Kana. So we want quantifications beyond GDP. We need to think of both boundaries and thresholds. So some things are limiting us, some things we need to keep expanding. That's the emancipation, the search for good life. There are principled and constructive ways to approach it. That's the bit we've really swept under the carpet in today's presentation, but that's the hard science I normally do in my professional work. I advise using the donut or thinking in terms of a mental model of a donut, but donut that's focused on degrowth. There are those that are not. We need to think of the right themes and indicators, and we need participative processes to pick them. So this isn't something that only a handful of experts can do. We need to go to broader groups of people and talk about what we want to involve here. And then we need to do an analysis of the situation from an entirely different paradigm. Thank you very much. I'm aware that I've slightly slid over time, so I'm happy to take any questions and comments from you. And thank you very much for your patience and bearing with me. Thanks.
Thank you, Mladen. It was a great presentation, very informative one, very constructive, and partly very, actually, yeah, provocative and kind of challenging towards some of the most salient convictions about the possibility of change and similar. So are there any questions? We have just a few minutes, but we do have time for questions or comments.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Thank you
this
for
was
the
it.
invitation.
Thank you.
Mladen, and thank you, Anya, for the great and interesting presentation. And I hope that we all have lots of reflection.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
It was nice meeting you.
Thank you, Goran.